Something is happening to American travel right now, and it's bigger than any single destination on this list. Two forces are colliding in 2026 inches, a way that hasn't happened in over a generation. The United States is hosting the FIFA World Cup for the first time since 1994, and at almost exactly the same time, the country turns 250 years old. Those aren't background facts. They're actively reshaping where people are going, why they're going, and what they expect when they arrive. Layer onto that the post-pandemic shift towards slower, more intentional, more neighborhood-level travel. And you get a domestic travel landscape that feels meaningfully different from the one most people still think they know. The old hierarchy of must-see cities still matters, but it's being disrupted by event-driven travel, by cultural timing, and by the growing sense that the best trips are not the ones where you see the most, but the ones where you feel the most. This list covers 15 of the best places to visit in the United States in 2026. Some are the biggest cities in the country, carrying more symbolic and cultural weight than ever before. Others are destinations that have matured into new versions of themselves. All of them are worth your time this year, not because they are timeless, but because 2026 gives each of them a specific urgency. 1. New York City, New York. New York City in 2026 is not the same city it was in 2019, and that's exactly the point. The city is moving into this year with major global attention, and the World Cup is one of the biggest reasons why. The New York-New Jersey region will host multiple matches, including the final, and official tourism authorities are already positioning the city around fan experiences, neighborhood exploration, and stadium-linked travel planning. But what makes New York interesting in 2026 isn't just that millions of people will come. It's that the city's own travel identity has shifted at the same time. The old version of New York tourism, Midtown, Times Square, quick museum stop, done, has been replaced by something broader and more borough-based. Official guides themselves now lean into that movement because that is where the city feels most alive. What that means in practice is that a New York trip works best when it is built in layers. You might start the day in Central Park and let the city still feel iconic for an hour, then move downtown for the High Line and Chelsea galleries. Then cross the river into Brooklyn, where Dumbo's waterfront gives you that skyline shot everyone wants. But after that, the city becomes much more interesting when you stop trying to cover it. Williamsburg works not because it is trendy, but because it lets you feel how New York evolves neighborhood by neighborhood. Harlem brings in a different tempo entirely, one tied to history, performance, and new cultural institutions. Queens, especially around the tennis center and the broader food corridors, becomes even more relevant in 2026 because the World Cup infrastructure pulls attention eastward in a way that tourists often ignore. The city's greatest advantage remains density of experience. Few places in the world let you move from the Met to a Dominican lunch spot in Upper Manhattan, then to a Korean cafe in Queens, then to a late-night crowd in Brooklyn without ever leaving the same urban organism. The challenge, as always, is scale. During the World Cup period, the city will be crowded, expensive, and logistically intense. Outside that period, it becomes easier, but not simpler. New York never rewards passive travel. It rewards choice. In 2026, more than ever, the people who get the best version of it are the ones who pick a few neighborhoods, commit to them, and let the city reveal itself one pocket at a time. 2. Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles has spent years being misunderstood as a destination, and 2026 may be the year that misunderstanding finally breaks. This is not a city that works as a sightseeing sprint. It is not Manhattan with palm trees, and people who visit it that way usually leave unsatisfied. The stronger version of Los Angeles travel in 2026 is neighborhood-based and lifestyle-driven. That shift has been building for years. But major events like the World Cup push it further because they bring more attention to the city while forcing visitors to think more carefully about movement, distance, and where the real experience actually lives. The matches at SoFi Stadium matter, but what matters more is that they amplify a city already moving toward selective, immersive travel rather than broad, superficial coverage. The version of LA that works now starts with accepting that you will not do Los Angeles. You will do one or two versions of it. Maybe that means beginning on the east side, where Silver Lake and Echo Park give you a softer, more residential access point into the city's creative culture. Maybe it means centering downtown, where the Arts District has become one of the most coherent zones in the city for galleries, restaurants, coffee, and adaptive reuse architecture. Or maybe you build the trip around the coast, but not in the old way. Venice now works less as a boardwalk cliché and more as a study in contrasts: the canals, the design-heavy stores on Abbot Kinney, the beach energy, and the low-grade chaos that still makes it unmistakably itself. Griffith Observatory still delivers one of the best skyline views in the country, but it feels strongest when it's one stop within a larger arc rather than the main event. Food is a major reason Los Angeles belongs on any serious 2026 list. Few American cities have a dining map as wide or as honest. Koreatown, Boyle Heights, the San Gabriel Valley, Little Tokyo, and scattered pockets across the city offer cuisines that are not tourist performances, but daily life. That matters because LA is one of the clearest examples of where American travel is heading, towards cities where you don't simply consume attractions, but enter cultural systems. The challenge is still logistics. Traffic remains real, distances remain real, and poor planning still ruins LA faster than almost anywhere else. But when you structure it around a few neighborhoods and let those areas breathe, Los Angeles stops feeling fragmented and starts feeling enormous in the best possible way. 3. Miami, Florida. Miami, in 2026, feels less like a seasonal destination and more like a permanent one. That's one of the most important changes in the city over the last 5 years. Miami used to operate in the American imagination as a place you escaped to in winter or partied in for a weekend. Now it functions much more like a global city, with a tourism economy layered on top of an already accelerated urban identity. Strong hotel performance, major event infrastructure, and an unusually international cultural base all support that shift. Miami's official destination data has shown the degree to which the market has strengthened, and by 2026, the city is no longer asking whether it belongs in top-tier American travel. It has already moved there. What makes Miami compelling now is that the city carries its energy differently depending on where you are. South Beach still does exactly what people expect it to do. Art Deco lines, beach crowds, nightlife, all of it. But the experience no longer ends there. Wynwood has matured past novelty and become a serious arts district, the kind of place where murals were once the headline but are now simply the backdrop for galleries, hospitality, and a fully formed cultural economy. Brickell has become the clearest symbol of Miami's newer identity. A dense urban core of towers, finance, restaurants, and people who are not visiting but actively building lives there. Then you move into Little Havana, and the city changes register again. The pace slows, the cultural markers become more rooted, and Calle Ocho feels like a place rather than a product. You can then move to Key Biscayne and find a version of Miami that is almost calm. That range is what gives the city unusual power. And 2026 amplifies all of it. Formula One remains part of the city's image, while World Cup matches at Hard Rock Stadium pull another layer of international attention into an environment that already knows how to absorb it. The challenge is cost. Miami is not cheap, and event windows can make it punishingly expensive. But the payoff is that few American cities currently feel as globally connected. Miami is not just one of the best places to visit in the U.S. in 2026 because it is fun. It is one of the best because it shows in real time how American travel is becoming more international, more urban, and more fluid all at once. 4. Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. in 2026 becomes more than a capital. It becomes one of the clearest places in the country where symbolism and travel overlap. With the United States marking its 250th anniversary on the 4th of July, 2026, the city takes on added gravity. America 250 is a national commemoration, but D.C. is one of the places where that commemoration becomes physically legible. The National Mall already functions as one of the most symbolically loaded public spaces in the country. In 2026, that symbolic density intensifies. The Lincoln Memorial, the Capitol, the Washington Monument, and the Smithsonian institutions all become more than attractions. They become active participants in the year itself. That matters, because it changes the emotional weight of a visit. You are not just passing through the machinery of American memory. You are arriving in a year when that memory is being publicly reactivated. What makes D.C. especially strong as a destination is that it is built for this kind of travel. The city is walkable in the places that matter most to visitors. The museum infrastructure is extraordinary, and, crucially, much of it is free. The Smithsonian network alone gives the city a cultural density that most places cannot match at any price point. That means a day can move from the National Museum of American History to the National Gallery to the National Archives without ever requiring the kind of logistical strain that undermines other big city trips. Georgetown and the Wharf add softer textures to that core, more local, more recreational, a little less ceremonial, which is important because D.C. works best when you let it breathe beyond the monuments. The challenge is obvious. Peak anniversary windows, especially around July 4, will be crowded. But outside those weeks, the city may actually offer one of the best value major city trips in the country. In 2026, Washington is not merely relevant because it is the capital. It is relevant because it gives travelers a rare thing, a chance to feel history as something active, spatial, and current, rather than archived. 5. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia in 2026 may have the strongest argument of any city in the country for being precisely right, precisely now. This is where the Declaration of Independence was signed. That alone would give Philadelphia unusual relevance in America's 250th year. But what makes the city special in 2026 is that its historical importance is not operating in isolation. It is colliding with modern event energy at an extraordinary scale. Philadelphia is hosting World Cup matches, major sports events, and citywide anniversary programming at the same time, which means visitors are not just arriving to look back. They are arriving to experience a city where the founding narrative of the country is colliding with one of the most globally visible cultural moments on Earth. Visit Philadelphia is already framing 2026 this way, and for once, the marketing language is not exaggerated. What makes Philadelphia work is that it remains one of the most navigable big cities in the country. You can move from Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell to the Museum of the American Revolution on foot, then pivot into Reading Terminal Market for one of the most concentrated and democratic food spaces in the U.S. Then head into Fishtown, where the city's more contemporary identity is taking shape through bars, restaurants, and small creative spaces. The Schuylkill River Trail adds another rhythm entirely, giving the city room to stretch and breathe. That compactness matters because it allows the trip to feel coherent. You are not shuttling between disconnected zones. Philadelphia's layers touch each other, and that is what will make the city unusually rewarding in 2026. History here is not abstract. It is attached to buildings, blocks, and civic space that still function inside a living city. At the same time, the sports and event calendar gives it pulse and urgency. Few cities will feel as time-stamped this year as Philadelphia. You can absolutely visit it later. But 2026 is the one year when the city's founding significance and its contemporary momentum are perfectly synchronized. 6. Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville in 2026 is still about music, but it is no longer only about music. That distinction matters. The city's tourism growth has been strong for years, but what makes this particular year special is the way Nashville is broadening the range of reasons people come. Broadway still functions as the concentrated center of gravity. Live music, bars, crowds, the whole spectacle. The Ryman Auditorium and the Grand Ole Opry still carry the city's cultural legitimacy. But 2026 adds a new layer with the opening of Dolly Parton's Songteller Hotel and the accompanying museum. That is not a minor hospitality launch. It is a culture-making opening tied to one of the most powerful symbols in Tennessee itself, and official tourism messaging in the state is already using Dolly as one of the anchors of the year. What makes Nashville interesting now is the way the city works once you move beyond the obvious. East Nashville gives you a different pace entirely. Less neon, more independent venues, smaller bars, and restaurants that make the city feel current rather than merely legendary. The National Museum of African American Music adds crucial depth to the city's sound identity, reminding visitors that Nashville's story is larger and more layered than country music branding alone. Food also plays a bigger role than many first-time visitors expect. Hot chicken may be the headline, but the city's dining scene has enough range now that it can sustain an entire trip. The challenge, of course, is density. Downtown can feel oversaturated, especially on weekends. But that challenge is also proof of the city's pull. Nashville in 2026 is not a one-note place. It is a city where heritage, tourism, celebrity culture, and local creativity are all operating at once. If you let yourself move beyond Broadway, it becomes one of the richest, mid-sized city trips in the country. 7. Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas in 2026 is no longer best understood as a gambling destination. It is now better understood as an immersion destination. That shift has been underway for years, but it becomes unmistakable with the rise of the Sphere. Official tourism materials and local coverage alike treat it not as a novelty, but as a major redefinition of what Las Vegas now sells to the world. The city's older promise was risk and spectacle. Its newer promise is spectacle without the need for risk. You come for the visual experience, the live performance, the absurdity of scale. The Strip still works as a corridor of excess, but the reason people travel to it is changing. Sphere is part of that. So are the city's ongoing headline residencies, culinary growth, and the expanding ecosystem of experiences that make it possible to visit Vegas without caring much about casinos at all. What that means in practical terms is that Las Vegas now functions as a series of designed intensities. The Strip remains the main theater, Bellagio fountains, late-night movement, oversized hotel environments that still have no equal. But the modern version of the city works best when you pair that with experiences that change the register. Area 15 continues to embody the city's experimental side, while Red Rock Canyon provides a physical and psychological reset just beyond the urban core. That contrast is more important than ever, because Vegas is no longer just trying to keep you inside. It is trying to show you that it can produce different forms of stimulation, from hyper-digital to entirely natural. In 2026, Las Vegas is one of the best places to visit in the U.S. because it reflects a broader transformation in American travel. People still want excitement, they still want scale, but they increasingly want it curated, immersive, and memorable in a way that goes beyond consumption. Las Vegas has understood that and rebuilt itself around it. 8. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago remains one of the most consistently underestimated cities in the United States, and in 2026, that understatement works in its favor. What Chicago offers is balance at a scale few cities can manage. The architecture gives it grandeur, but the lakefront gives it relief. Millennium Park and the Art Institute give it institutional depth, but neighborhoods like Wicker Park and Logan Square keep it from feeling overly formal. The Architecture River Cruise remains one of the best orientation experiences in any American city, because it lets you understand not just the skyline, but the logic behind it. And then the city opens laterally, out to the lake, into side streets, into food corridors, and local cultural zones that make Chicago feel broad rather than vertical. That balance is what makes it so strong in 2026. Travelers increasingly want cities that feel substantial without feeling punishing. Chicago does that better than most. It has the scale of a major global city without the same level of fatigue. The lakefront, especially in warmer months, changes the emotional profile of the trip. You can move from museums to beaches to neighborhood restaurants without ever feeling like you are doing 3 separate vacations. Summer festivals, sports, and public life add momentum without overwhelming the place. What keeps Chicago from always being in the very top tier of American travel lists is weather, anxiety, and, occasionally, perception. But for travelers who choose the right season, that turns into an advantage. The city still feels like a discovery to people who have somehow delayed seeing it. In 2026, it remains one of the smartest urban trips in the country, precisely because it over-delivers relative to expectation. Navi, Orlando, Florida. Orlando, in 2026, is one of the clearest examples of how engineered travel can still be powerful if the engineering is good enough. Universal Epic Universe is the central reason. Official Universal materials make clear that this is not a marginal addition. It is a major new park built around 5 distinct immersive worlds, and it changes the scale of what an Orlando trip can be. That matters because Orlando already functions as one of the most systematized tourism environments in the world. The city doesn't ask you to discover it. It asks you to enter a structure and move through it. Epic Universe gives that structure an entirely new center of gravity. What makes Orlando work, even for people who think they are not theme park people, is the layering of experience. The parks are only the most obvious form of it. Resorts, dining districts, performance spaces, and increasingly self-contained entertainment ecosystems mean that the city now sustains trips at multiple levels of intensity. Families can build around the parks. Adults can build around design, spectacle, and nostalgia. Groups can move through it almost like a managed entertainment corridor. That is not subtle travel, but it is highly effective travel. In 2026, Orlando belongs on this list because it is in expansion mode rather than maintenance mode. It is not just operating its most famous assets. It is actively adding new reasons to come. In a year when many of the best destinations are strong because of timing, Orlando is strong because of infrastructure, because it is one of the few places in the country where the tourism machine itself is still visibly growing. 10. Boston, Massachusetts. Boston in 2026 feels like a city stepping directly into its own relevance. With Boston 250 and Revolution 250 already active, the city is not simply benefiting from America's anniversary year in an abstract sense. It is one of the places where that anniversary becomes fully spatial. The Freedom Trail has always made Boston unusually legible as a history destination, but in 2026, that legibility becomes an advantage of timing. Visitors are arriving in a year when the city is not only preserving its revolutionary past, but actively commemorating it through year-long programming, local events, and public emphasis on the city's role in the founding story. What keeps Boston from becoming overly ceremonial is the fact that it remains an actual city rather than a commemorative set piece. Beacon Hill's narrow streets, the North End's dense restaurant culture, and the academic energy of Cambridge and Harvard Square all keep the trip from collapsing into educational tourism. You can walk the Freedom Trail in the morning, eat in the North End in the afternoon, and be across the Charles in a completely different atmosphere by evening. That compactness matters. Boston doesn't demand huge logistical effort to feel complete. It unfolds naturally through walking, which makes the historical layering feel earned rather than staged. In 2026, Boston works because it aligns place and timing unusually well. It is one thing to visit a historically important city. It is another to visit it in the exact year when its historical relevance becomes nationally central again. That is what makes Boston one of the smartest trips in the country this year. 11. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans remains one of the few American cities where tourism does not feel like an overlay. It feels like an extension of the city's natural pulse. That matters in 2026 because so much travel now revolves around timing, novelty, or event stack. New Orleans does not need those things to justify itself. The French Quarter still works as a point of entry because it is dense, textured, and instantly recognizable. But the city reveals its real depth once you move toward Frenchmen Street, where music feels less staged and more lived. That distinction is central to why New Orleans endures. The sound of the city is not being performed for visitors as a simulation. It is simply part of how the place operates. At the same time, New Orleans offers strong contrast inside a relatively compact footprint. The Garden District slows everything down. Streetcars change the tempo. The National World War II Museum adds a layer of institutional seriousness that many first-time visitors do not expect. Food remains one of the city's strongest arguments, not just because it is famous, but because it still feels continuous with the culture that produced it. The city doesn't flatten cuisine into attractions. It lets it remain embedded in neighborhoods, family traditions, and local rhythm. New Orleans belongs on this list in 2026 because it offers something increasingly rare. A destination whose identity has not been standardized by tourism. It still feels itself. And in a year when so many places are being revisited because of national or global events, that kind of cultural continuity becomes even more valuable. 12. Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston, in 2026, feels precise. That is the best way to describe it. The city does not overwhelm you with scale or speed. It works through composition. The historic district, with its architecture, church spires, waterfront, and carefully preserved streets, creates an environment that feels almost too coherent by American standards. But what makes Charleston more than just visually pleasing is that the city's rhythm matches the built environment. It is a place that rewards slower movement. That matters more now, because travel itself has shifted in that direction. The food scene has become one of the clearest reasons to visit, and it does not rely solely on one or two famous names anymore. The city can now support a trip built partly around dining, partly around architecture, and partly around regional history. The waterfront and the walkability of the historic core keep the city feeling contained and elegant, while the surrounding low-country atmosphere gives it a softness that many more intense cities lack. Charleston's 2026 relevance also increases because of anniversary-related programming tied to the city's role in the broader American story. But even without that, it would remain one of the most refined and satisfying smaller city destinations in the country. Charleston works when you allow yourself to slow down to its pace. If you do, the city becomes less about seeing and more about inhabiting. In 2026, that is a stronger proposition than it may sound. Many destinations are getting louder. Charleston is getting clearer. 13. San Diego, California. San Diego's greatest strength in 2026 is that it still delivers on the version of itself people hope exists. That may sound simple, but it is not. Many destinations now suffer from a widening gap between expectation and reality. San Diego largely avoids that. Official tourism materials continue to frame the city around the combination of coastline, outdoor access attractions, and neighborhood ease, and unusually, the city really does function that way. La Jolla Cove remains one of the most beautiful and accessible oceanfront zones in California. Balboa Park is still a huge civic asset with museums, gardens, performance spaces, and the zoo, all operating inside a landscape large enough to feel like a self-contained world. Torrey Pines remains one of the most visually rewarding stretches of coastal reserve in the state, and 2026 adds a bit more event relevance through major golf attention at Torrey Pines itself. What makes San Diego different from many other California cities is how naturally the trip connects. You can move from the coast to the park system to urban nightlife without feeling like you've changed destinations. Coronado still offers one of the easiest reset points in Southern California, while neighborhoods like the Gaslamp Quarter or North Park give the city enough internal variation to sustain multiple days without repetition. Food also matters more here than the city is often given credit for, especially because of the cross-border influence from Baja, which continues to shape everything from taco culture to fine dining. In 2026, San Diego belongs on this list because consistency itself has become a competitive advantage. It may not feel as event-loaded as New York or Philadelphia, but it offers something many travelers increasingly want, a destination where weather, atmosphere, scenery, and pace actually line up. País Presente. Honolulu, Hawaii. Honolulu in 2026 represents a more complicated version of paradise, and that complication is part of why it matters. What makes Oahu different from many mainland destinations is that the question is no longer only why you should visit, but how. Official Hawaiian tourism strategy is now openly shaped by sustainability, local impact, and the long-term pressure of mass tourism. That does not make Honolulu less desirable. If anything, it makes the trip more meaningful because the island is actively asking visitors to think about their presence, rather than consume the place passively. Waikiki still functions as the obvious entry point, because the infrastructure is there, the beach is there, and the entire system is designed to receive people. But 2026 is a particularly strong year to move beyond that default. Official island guidance itself emphasizes the broader geography of Oahu, the North Shore, Kailua, the Windward Coast, as essential parts of understanding the place. That broader movement matters, because Honolulu works best when you let contrast define the trip. Diamond Head gives you the city's physical logic in one climb. Pearl Harbor adds historical gravity that shifts the emotional tone entirely. The North Shore pulls you into a slower culture organized around surf, land, and space, rather than hotel concentration. Kailua offers a version of beach life that feels far removed from Waikiki, despite being on the same island. If you build the trip this way, Honolulu stops feeling like a resort base and starts feeling like an entry point into multiple Hawaiian realities. In 2026, Honolulu is one of the best places to visit in the U.S., not because it is easy, but because it now asks more of the visitor and gives more back if that challenge is accepted. 15. Denver, Colorado. Denver in 2026 is one of the clearest examples of a city whose greatest value lies in how it connects you outward. That does not mean the city itself is secondary. Denver has become more compelling on its own over the last several years, with the Rhino Arts District, the Denver Art Museum, and a steadily deepening restaurant scene all giving it more internal pull. But the reason it belongs on a best places list is that it sits at the threshold of one of the most accessible nature systems in the country. Official travel materials continue to position Denver as a launch point for the Rockies, and that is not marketing exaggeration. Within a relatively short drive, the entire emotional register of the trip can change from city blocks and galleries to mining towns, alpine roads, trailheads, and major mountain resorts. That gateway quality lines up perfectly with where travel is heading. Travelers increasingly want the option to combine city structure with outdoor openness, and Denver gives them one of the easiest ways to do it. Red Rocks Amphitheater remains one of the most distinctive performance venues in the country, functioning almost like a symbolic bridge between built entertainment and the landscape itself. Rocky Mountain National Park remains one of the most obvious excursions, but even without going that far, Denver allows for a kind of modular trip design that is increasingly valuable in 2026. Part urban, part scenic, part active, part restorative. The challenge is that other people know this too. Seasonal crowding is real, especially when skiing, summer hiking, and event travel all converge. But that only reinforces Denver's position. It is not merely a city to visit, it is a city to launch from. And in 2026, that may be one of the strongest travel propositions anywhere in the country. What these places share is not one identity. New York is different from Charleston. Honolulu is different from Denver. New Orleans is different from Orlando. That is exactly the point. What they share is timing. In 2026, each of them is carrying something specific that does not exist in exactly the same way in another year. For some, it is event gravity, the World Cup, America 250, citywide anniversaries, major openings. For others, it is a travel environment that has quietly matured into a better version of itself. And in a few cases, it is the opposite. A reminder that the most interesting trips are not always the loudest ones, but the places where culture, pace, and timing finally line up. Travel has always been about choosing where to put your time. In 2026, the American landscape gives you an unusual number of reasons to choose carefully. That is what makes this year special. Not just that there is more happening, but that what is happening is changing how these places feel.